First thing, not going to be here next week, so we'll just do everything that needs to be done online. Just follow the syllabus. I'll put some additional video material up and do the discussion boards. I haven't seen any activity on there yet. I'll assign some additional reading as well, though there's plenty of reading in there, as we've seen. Though most of them are fairly short, so they're quite brief, and just cut to the heart of the matter. So let me begin by briefly reviewing where we were, and then we'll launch forward. Okay, so general summary. So metaphysics explores the basic structure of reality. Ontology, which is the study of being, or the fundamental categories of being, play a central role in metaphysics, though it's not all of metaphysics. These categories of being are highly general classifications of things or entities. They might just cover actual existing entities or possible entities or epistemically possible entities, which means what may be real or might be real as far as we know, depending on the context of investigation, what you're interested in exploring. Do you want to know what could be real, or do you want to know what's actually real, or do you want to be open-ended because you're not sure what's real or not real? Some examples of these categories are substance, property, relations, space, time, event, boundary, absence or privation, meaning an entity like a shadow or a hole or a gap, collections and states of affairs, just to give you a sampling. Not meant to be exhaustive by any means. You might be able, maybe as a homework exercise, to try to think of some other kinds of entities that we commonly recognize that wouldn't fall into any of these categories. Okay, and then I was saying that we can't tell a priori what categories of entity are real. We may know that something exists a priori, perhaps, like oneself. Descartes said we have direct access to our own existence. But you're not sure what category you fall under a priori. Are you a body or a soul? Descartes puzzled over that one, as have many others. In the same way, we know a priori that 2 and 2 is 4, but I don't think we can say what numbers are, just a priori. So all these are questions for metaphysics or ontology. Some take the approach of admitting very many different kinds of entities, and others prefer the desert landscape of ontological minimalism, which says there's just one kind of thing, or one kind of thing fundamentally. Those approaches are known as monistic approaches. So monism is the view that there's just one entity, or in terms of categories, just one category of entity. So one kind of monism says there's just one entity. It's like one thing.
So one entity makes up the
whole universe. It's just this one yeah. So it might be like one big thing, like the universe.
Or water.
Or no, well, but that's more category monism. Like there are many raindrops, but they all fall in the same category. So that would be the other kind of monism. That there's just one category of entity, as opposed to there's just one entity. So the one has to do with how many kinds of entities there are. So you're minimizing the number of kinds on one type of monism, and the other you're counting individuals, and you're saying there's just one individual, like the big water droplet or something. But no one's ever held that water is a single entity. So there you get more views like pantheism. There's this one entity, God, and God's identical with the whole entire universe, considered as a unified thing. So, but we're more interested in category monism right now, saying that there's just one kind of thing. There might be many individuals in that kind. So if you're a substance monist, you might say substance is the only category of entity, and all those substances, although there are many of them, are all there is. And you might further hold the view of materialism, which is a form of substance monism, saying that there's only one kind of substance, and so everything is a material substance, and that's all there is. Or maybe there is more than just substances, but substance is the basic category. That is, other kinds of entities that exist, like minds, say, or souls, reduced to substances or are entirely explained by material substances. So that on that kind of view, which is called reductive materialism, there are other kinds of things like minds, but they can be reduced to material things. That's still considered a form of monism, though a more forgiving, less onerous, strict form of monism. The stricter form says there's just particles and everything else is an illusion. People don't exist. Yeah.
So, material monism, or like reductive monism, materialism. What
Yeah.
is the difference between material monism and reductive monism? Materialism? I see a lot of repeating words in the definitions that you're giving.
Okay, so are we just talking about materialism now? So,
You just said category monism, material monism, and then reductive.
well, yeah, material monism is a form of category monism. It says there's just one basic category. Material objects. Everything falls into that. There are many material objects, of course, right? And they all fall under the material object category, and that's the basic category of the universe.
Okay.
So that view just says everything is material.
So
Everything's a body. Only bodies exist.
material monism falls beneath the category of category monism, but category monism does not necessarily
Right.
mean material monism.
Yeah, so materialism says only, taking a simple materialism, only bodies exist.
So this could be like exemplified in the sentence like emotions are just chemical reactions which are just physical properties.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, but then you could have spiritualism. It says only souls exist.
Yes, which is the competing theory, I guess.
It's one competing theory. Yeah, only minds exist, or it's better to say souls, I guess.
And both of these views are what you call.
They're inconsistent,
They're
right?
inconsistent, but they're both monism because.
Yes. Then there's dualism. Yeah, so these are monisms, category monisms. As they're saying, they're not saying there's just one entity, right, in the universe.
No, but there's one category.
One category of things. Yeah. And then you have dualism, which is what René Descartes held. He said both bodies and souls exist, but not that there are both bodies and souls exist. So that's two categories, two basic categories. This is a form of pluralism, saying that there's more than one type of thing. So suppose you say there are bodies and souls and their properties. So it's a third category, properties. So that would still be pluralism.
Is there another, I guess, idea aside dualism that exists in the realm of pluralism, or is it just dualism?
No, I was just saying you could have bodies, souls, and properties.
Ah, okay, I didn't catch that.
Yeah. So then you'd have 3 categories of things.
Understood.
Or 4 or 5, depending on what you add in. You might add in events and absences or whatever, right? All kinds of stuff.
Okay,
States of affairs.
so the themes that we talked about
Yeah.
last class.
Right, so event ontology is another form of monism. It says only events exist. Alfred North Whitehead. So therefore, if Descartes' right and Whitehead is right, I exist, but only events exist. If both those are true, then I am
An event.
an event. Yeah, but that seems wrong, right? Because it seems like I'm a substance.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it doesn't seem completely wrong, because if life is only defined between death and birth, then your life is an event and not concept.
Yeah, maybe. But if you think about it really carefully, you'd want to distinguish between you and your life. Like your life is something that happens to you. You live your life, just like you play a game, right? So it seems like there's 2 things there. There's the event, the playing or the living, and the player.
Well, once the game ends, you're no longer the player, right?
Not necessarily. Well, that depends, right, on your view. You might say that you still exist, but your life has ended. You're a corpse now. That's what a materialist would say, that you've become a corpse. You've lost life, but you're still there because the matter is still there. Mm-hmm. But you don't have to say that. I mean, you could say, right, and it's arguable. Certainly it's an arguable point. You could say when your life ends, you've passed away and you cease to exist, right? That's a highly intuitive view too, right? We speak both ways, so it's a controversial. We say he's in his grave. We also say that he's gone.
He's no longer there.
We say both, right? So we're not consistent. There's no like official belief about it that we, as common sense people, like have to adhere to. So yeah, it's wide open on that. But there's still going to be a distinction either way. I say between the player and what he plays, or between the stroll and who took the stroll, right? So yeah, there seem to be lots of examples where we're going to distinguish between the event and the object that takes part in the event. I'm not saying, though, that there must be a player or a substance for every event, right? If we say that there are some events that nothing, so to speak, there's no substance involved, right? Then you're going to wind up with both basic substances and basic events. It's like, I mean, if there are some events that don't have substances associated with them, then it looks like events could exist all on their own. Aristotle thought that you can define an event as a change in a substance. So if you take that view, then you can't have events without substances. But if you think that events could exist on their own, then you could have events without substances, and you can have substances without events, right? Like unchanging substances, right? Like imagine just like a single electron or something, right? Or a photon that's been frozen, that's not moving, it's just like there. There's no event, right? Like an immutable substance that's not moving. Yeah, so you can have a substance without an event, right? And you can have an event without a substance. Well, I haven't given you an example of that, though. You asked for an example, right? Quantum mechanics seems to say that you can have events without substances, because there's this famous double slit experiment which says that if you have light, it can sometimes behave as a wave.
Acts as a particle.
But in other contexts, it'll behave as a particle. So it goes back and forth. So no one can figure out how that works. So it seems like science posits both light as an event and light as a particle, depending on the situation. different situations lead to different observations of what's going on. Einstein was able to observe light as a photon bouncing off of a metallic surface called the photoelectric effect, which is what leads to solar power.
Yeah.
Yeah. On the other hand, if you put it through a slit, you can have it behave just like a wave. Not once, two slits, right? It goes through two slits. You're going to observe it as a wave. So it looks like there could be a basic duality at the fundamental physical level between like pure events and particles. That's one way it could happen. And then we just have like pluralism, right? We have events, and we also have. And when we see energy, we see it as a pure event. We don't see the underlying particle. So phenomenologically, it's not that difficult to conceive of a subjectless event, like a flash. When you see a lightning flash, you can't see a discharge of electrons, anything. So, I mean, we can conceptualize just like something happening, a happening, without it happening to this subject. On the other hand, so Aristotle's program may not be realizable there. That's what inspired Whitehead to say, like, it's all basically events. That doesn't seem right either, because it seems like many events, certainly at the macroscopic level, the level of medium-sized objects that we can actually see with the unaided senses, those are very clearly require a subject of the event to undergo change, like a person taking a walk or a candle burning, or right? Those are more typical everyday events. But the events in physics can't be neglected, and light waves are very odd. They don't occur in a medium. So when they say there are light waves, they're not like the waves you see in the ocean or electromagnetic waves in general. There's no medium for these waves. So they're not a disturbance in some more basic substance like water or air, something like that. So it seems like they're not dependent on substances at all. They may sometimes change into substances, but then again, substances turn into these waves. It goes back and forth. So we don't really know what the ultimate nature of these things might be, which takes me to the topic of knowledge. But I'll take one question before I go to that.
So I want to know how event ontology might be consistent with a priori knowledge. It doesn't seem like it would be, because events seem to presuppose some sort of experience with the event, and a priori knowledge.
Well, I was saying we don't have a priori knowledge of what the basic categories are.
Right.
Yeah, but you're asking about just knowledge in general?
Like, how would event ontology be consistent with the idea of a priori knowledge?
How would it be consistent with it? You mean if only events exist?
Yes.
If there's nothing permanent, so to speak?
Yeah.
And so the idea is events are ephemeral or relatively ephemeral, yet we have a priori knowledge. I guess that would be something the event ontologist would have to explain.
Yeah.
But I recall that in Process and Reality, Whitehead said that in addition to events, there are also eternal objects. So I don't think Whitehead strictly has a pure event ontology. He's going to wind up being a pluralist. He just won't have substances, maybe.
What's the primary of this concept again? Who's the author of this idea?
Of event ontologies? Yeah. Alfred North Whitehead is a biggie. He collaborated with Bertrand Russell to write the Principia Mathematica, which is a foundational treatise on the nature of mathematics. Defended the idea that mathematics could be reduced to logic. It was written in the early 20th century by these two intellectual heavyweights as a joint book. And Whitehead went on to have a very illustrious career at Harvard University and wrote a number of books defending process philosophy. Among more recent philosophers, Donald Davidson is noted as a defender of the existence of events and the idea that events are form an irreducible category of being is defended by Davidson. Does he say they're the only kind of entity? I don't think so. But he does stress that events must be recognized as a category. Yeah.
How does that work with Kant's idea of a priori?
Right. I'm going to get into that right now. So just if you'll just bear with me for a moment. Right. So traditionally, in the Age of Enlightenment, this is before Kant, say, in the 1700s, 1800s, many of the great philosophers in Europe at the time kind of took an a prioristic approach to metaphysics. So I've got in mind here, so the three great rationalistic philosophers, Descartes and Spinoza and Leibniz. Spinoza is the most flagrantly a prioristic metaphysician in the group. I mean, he just defines everything, and so we can know a priori that the universe, we can figure it out. There's one substance, which is God, and there are some other categories of things called attributes, which this one substance has, and then there are modes or states of the substance, and that's it. And he claims to deduce all this from some elementary logical principles and definitions and axioms, all a priori. Descartes says we can deduce it all from I exist by logical deduction. Leibniz isn't quite as obviously a total rationalist, but pretty much he thinks we can figure out the structure of the universe a priori. And it turns out to be kind of strange. It consists of spiritual centers of thought called monads, none of which interact with each other, but all of which mirror each other internally, and so that they can coordinate with each other even though they never interact. Yeah, and he says I can prove all this, by logical reasoning from fundamental a priori principles. So Kant, Kant is going to reject that idea in a way, but he's going to kind of come up with a different notion of the a priori, one that's much more subjectivistic. The other three philosophers, these three fell into what camp of thought? Anyone know what they're called? They're called the rationalists. So you can see how that by reason alone we can know. And what's the opposite of rationalism? Empiricism, right. So who are the three great competing empiricist thinkers here? John Locke, George Berkeley, and David Hume. Okay, and these empiricists basically say that we have to base all our knowledge on experience, on sense perception, and reflection. By reflection, they mean internal observation, like of the contents of your mind. So you can have outer perception of bodies and internal perception of the state of your body. Berkeley concludes from empiricism that only souls exist. Locke says there are both bodies and souls, and Hume says he has no idea what exists beyond fleeting impressions that we have and the ideas that we copy. Make mental images of these impressions, and these are known as ideas. He says all we can really say that exists are impressions and ideas and nothing beyond that. We don't know whether there are bodies or souls or anything else. Okay, so Hume is kind of a skeptic. Kant, on the other hand, seeks to transcend both empiricism and rationalism and come up with something different from each. And though borrowing something from each, like a synthesis of the two. His idea seems to be that there's something out there, like Hume suggested that maybe there's something out there, but we don't know what it is. Kant says there's something out there and we can't know what it is. But science, as we know it, deals with the universe as observed by man. And within that realm, we can have knowledge of how our mind shapes the universe. So we kind of study human psychology to understand what the universe is like. He says that based on that analysis, everything must occur in space and time. There must be organizing principles in nature, which he calls substances, and these must enter into relations of cause and effect, because all of this is how the human mind shapes the input. The input's coming from something out there, but we can't say what that is. So Kant's a priori knowledge is really an a priori knowledge of psychological conditions in the mind. It's not a priori knowledge of what reality is in itself, and that's what the earlier philosophers were claiming to possess. A priori knowledge not of the structure of the human mind, but of the structure of the reality that that mind apprehends. So Kant kind of changed the subject. So we can put him off to the side there. He's no longer really interested in metaphysics, but like metapsychology or something. These guys are actually more interested in metaphysics, except that Hume is a skeptic about metaphysics. Except just that he admits there are impressions inside the mind. So there's that. Beyond that, he doesn't think we can draw any firm conclusions about the nature of reality. He would say it could be anything out there. So skepticism. There are three responses to metaphysics. There's a skeptic response, there's the nihilist response. And so you have the skeptic and you have the nihilist. What does the skeptic say? We can't know what the fundamental structure of reality or what the correct inventory of basic categories is, or any of these things. So that's sort of Hume's position. He famously said we can pick up any book in the library on divinity or metaphysics and hurl it into the garbage bin. Actually, he said hurl it into the fire, but that would put him like as a book burner. He didn't know that, though, because this was like 1800, and he couldn't foretell that there would be Nazis and book burners. Not Hume's fault. Shut that. But yeah, he said you can toss them in the garbage barrel because they don't contain anything except pure speculation, uninformed by any reasonable principles. So what are we to say to that? So he's in direct opposition to these guys, right? Mm-hmm. They said you could deduce the whole like basic essence of reality from a couple of a priori statements and come up with like really surprising conclusions about them. ultimate nature of reality. Like Spinoza, there's only one thing really, and he'll tell you, only one substance. Though he's both he's a pluralist overall because he says there are attributes and modes, right? All these things. But he says that within the category of substance, there's only one of those. And for him, that's the most basic category. So there's only one basic kind of thing.
But doesn't he deny he's a dualist?
Spinoza, yeah.
Yeah, he denies.
Well, he denies that he's a dualist about the human mind.
Oh, good.
But he does say that individuals are different from one another. You're one mode of the substance. He's a different mode. I'm a third mode. And there are also multiple attributes of the substance. So there are many dimensions to reality. One of those dimensions is mind, and another of those dimensions is body. So in one way, he distinguishes mind and body as different attributes of God.
But still of the same essence?
No, they have a different essence. The way they're the same is that in a given mode, a single mode has both.
Oh, within it.
Within it, yeah.
Okay.
That's how he denies Descartes' view. So you don't have both a soul and a body. You're just one substance that happens to have two dimensions to you, a physical dimension and a mental dimension.
Mm-hmm.
Spinoza says there are infinitely many dimensions like that, but we only know two.
But do they exist?
Extension and thought are the only two. Dimensions of the one substance that we can know.
Do they exist on the same plane?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. They're all aspects of God.
Oh, okay.
God's the universe, though. Nothing more, nothing less. Universe turns out to have extension, consciousness, all kinds of things. Though it's broken up into lots of little different pieces, like your consciousness and his. They all add up, though, to form the universal supreme consciousness.
Like Nous?
Like a which?
Like Nous? Like
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, with the nihilist response to metaphysics, what does that constitute? Like, so is that dealing with like certain, like I have an impression of what that nihilist response would be.
Yeah, the nihilist says nothing exists.
Okay. So there's nothing exists at all.
Nothing.
Okay.
Yeah, nothing whatsoever. Yeah.
Who says that?
That is a joke.
Gorgias said that.
Never mind.
He was an ancient Greek nihilist who lived to be 103.
Wow.
That's what they said.
That's what he said.
Yeah. Yeah, he says nothing exists. He purports to give a proof. So he has an a priori argument.
What was his a priori?
Yeah, I got lots of steps. I can't go through it here.
It's a long proof.
But yeah, basically that if anything existed, it would have to have contradictory properties, like being both one and many, big and small, and all kinds of things. Anything you can think of, it would have to be both it and its opposite, which is not good. So yeah, so he concludes that it would have to both be eternal and instantaneous, and all kinds. Yeah, like yeah. He thinks he can cleverly show that everything contradicts itself, so that nothing exists.
Seems like a little sleight of hand.
For sure. Yeah, so there are some good objections to that, right? Like who's saying that and all that stuff. Right. Right. So, leaving nihilism aside, what should we say to the skeptic, though? The skeptic's position is that nobody knows. No one can know what exists.
Does the skeptic know that?
He doesn't have to know it. It's just he can claim it. So what would be? Couldn't the response be that we're after something more modest than knowledge here, though, but just the most credible level of belief that can be attained? So we might concede that we don't know which metaphysical theory is true, or what ultimately waves and particles in physics are, but we can still defend one belief about that matter as being more credible than another belief. It's like saying, well, we don't know whether it will rain tomorrow. But if the forecast predicts a 90% chance of rain, then we can say, although we don't know whether it'll rain tomorrow, the belief that it will rain tomorrow is still credible or justified to a significant degree, and is more plausible than any belief which contradicts the credible belief. So why not take that view? How would Hume show that no belief can be credible? I don't think he could show that, because to do that, he'd have to rely on some credible beliefs in order to show that. One might be able to show that no belief is known to be true by means of credible propositions, however. There might be some set of credible propositions which suggest or imply that no one knows anything. So there was a school of ancient skepticism known as academic skepticism. The Academy was a school founded by Plato, and it sort of devolved from metaphysics into skepticism, but it was a limited skepticism which taught that probability is the guide of life, and that probability is attainable but knowledge not.
There seems to be so much borrowing from what they're trying to deny there. It's kind of like if someone says, I can't speak, or I can't say anything in English. Mm-hmm. You might question that since the statement was in English. In the same way, every variant of what you've said in some way supposed it had the very thing it's denying, or like, so even in your probability thing, if you're to say that this person is just asserting it, you know, that they would deny that even that had any kind of reason. Well, why should we accept anything they say any more than, you know, the rambling guy in the street?
Well, because we shouldn't unless they gave...
If you say they give reasons, though...
They give reasons, yeah, and reasons can be reasons why something is probably the case. Why does it have to be certainty? That's the part I don't get. Right? Why does it have to rise to the level of certainty? It doesn't have to rise to the level of certainty. In science, theories are confirmed using probability. So, yeah. Now, it might be that some things are certain and should be recognized as certain. I'm not denying that. Like I exist, or a square has four sides, and things like that. I don't have any trouble with acknowledging those as known myself. But if anyone does, the fallback position would be that, well, they're still more credible than their denials would be. And so credibility provides us with a point of view from which we can pursue theoretical justification for various philosophies. Yeah.
So I'm wondering, so is the goal of this more modest knowledge, is the goal of this to prioritize or put into a hierarchy different belief structures and saying that, okay, this belief structure should take priority or take precedence over the second belief structure? Or is it asserting that you should just also that this belief structure is valid as well as along with possibly other belief structures? So instead of it being like a 1, 2, 3, 4, like top down sort of belief structure.
It doesn't have to be top down.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, the basic idea here is just to answer the skeptic or the nihilist, right? To provide some kind of answer to them. So my answer to the skeptic is, even if knowledge in some areas is unattainable, it may still be that knowledge is attainable in other areas, of course, which is what you're saying. Like even if metaphysical knowledge about the ultimate character of the category is unattainable, it still may be that one account is much more credible than any of the others, and so, right? And it may be that in some cases we can have absolute certainty, but not about maybe the ultimate categories, but about particular things. Like I might be totally certain that I'm seeing red when I'm looking at something red, whatever. That doesn't tell me what redness is, though, which is the metaphysical category question. It doesn't tell me whether it's an object or a quality or a stage or an event or whatever. Right? Still can try to investigate into that. That may be more difficult, and we may have to settle for less than certainty there. But as Hume showed, we have to settle for less than certainty with anything that falls outside the sphere of what we immediately observe. So we can't know for certain that the sun will rise tomorrow.
Unobservable things.
Things that you...
Because again, you're going to run into if you mean that broadly, again, you're going to run into the problem with that.
No, I just said things you haven't, things that lie outside your sphere of observation at a moment can't be known at that moment. Right? They can only be not known with certainty. They can only be inferred with some degree of probability.
Empirical data, though, right? Because obviously
the data could be
proposition itself that you just outlined.
Yeah.
Can't hold its own standard if just left in isolation like that. Wouldn't you have to add the qualifying clause that it is, applying to only, the alleged world around us?
What, that the sun will rise tomorrow?
Well, no, not that wasn't the proposition.
Oh.
That wasn't what I was
Oh.
taking issue with.
What's the proposition?
What you said, that the only things you can be certain of are those that you are experiencing. Right now, the immediate impressions.
No, I don't think I said that. What I said was there may be some things like I exist or that I see red right now, which are
Well, you said that later. I'm saying what you and you
that are known for certain. Right? There may be some things like that can be argued to be known for certain, and I'm not denying that.
Would Hume accept that?
You see, it seems like he does. Yeah. Yeah. Hume accepts that we have knowledge of what we immediately perceive or remember. Yeah, he accepts that. He accepts that there's immediate data of observation, but denies that we can have knowledge of what lies outside the immediate data. He says we at best can have probability, if we can have even that. There are issues in Hume interpretation about whether he goes totally whole hog skeptic and says we can't even have probable beliefs about these unobserved things, or whether he just says that we have to satisfy or content ourselves with mere probability. So, yeah, I'll wait for that sonata to start. Okay.
You start singing to it.
Hume does accept that we have knowledge of some kind of foundational basis. But even if he didn't, the foundational basis could just be one of inherent credibility. So you might say my basis are credible things which could be revised later if there's evidence to revise. Yeah. You don't have to have, for the purposes of formal theory of knowledge, a foundation of utter certainties for practical purposes. Now, you may want to have such a foundation just because there are some things like that, and if they are totally certain, then why not admit it and use them? But it's not like our whole structure of human justification for our beliefs will crumble without absolute certainties as a theoretical matter. And a lot of things that people have thought certain have turned out not to be as certain as people thought them to be. So, like people thought it was obvious that the Earth was flat, and it turned out not to be. And they had conceptual arguments for that. Like, if the Earth isn't flat, then people on the other side of the world would be hanging upside down, and that's absurd. And those arguments turn out to be confused. Right? They don't take into account that up and down are relative to a gravitational center. So there are conceptual changes and things where we realize that some ideas that we had that seemed obvious weren't actually obvious. So I don't see any big harm that comes out of admitting that some of the things we put in our absolute foundation may have to be thrown out later and turn out to be revised. What can't happen is that everything that we judge to be our foundation is thrown out. Then we'd be in trouble. Yeah.
Was it Kant who said that intellect has to be suspended for faith to exist?
I don't think Kant ever said that.
Really?
No, he didn't say that. Kant thinks that faith is needed for reason in a certain kind of way. That our normative structures of right and wrong, and so forth, depend on some assumptions that can't be certified by reason. So we assume them as presuppositions of our structure, and that's kind of like faith. Yeah. Right. Kant thinks, for example, like that we have to really sort of suppose that there's such a thing as free will and such a thing as a God, even though we can't prove these things, because our moral structures depend on some assumptions to that effect, and so it's okay to accept these things even though you can't prove them. All right, so that's the skeptic and the nihilist. So the nihilist we can sort of just send off, and the skeptic we can concede to him his due and say, well, yeah, we'll have a more modest metaphysics, one that doesn't pretend to have established with certainty what the ultimate structure is, one that leads to conclusions that are in principle revisable as new data comes in that's relevant. Okay. There's a third guy, though, known as the relativist. All right, so the relativist, one of the first relativists was a character named Protagoras.
That's your opinion.
He was buddies with Gorgias, actually, the nihilist. They did a traveling show. It's true. They were both members of a school of thought known as sophistry. So they were called the sophists. And they trained people to go to law school and do stuff like that. Seriously, I was there. But they did. All right, so Protagoras' statement, we only have like one fortune cookie worth of stuff from Protagoras. Which is, man is the measure of all things, of what is, that it is, of what is not, that it is not. Put that statement up there. So Protagoras, man is the measure of all things, of what is, that it is, of what is not, that it is not. Right. So, according to him, these are words to live by. There's some merit to the observation that we live in times that seem to subscribe in many ways to this kind of opinion. Right? Like people who question media reports and say there's no, that we can manufacture truths, that I have my facts and you have your facts. And all these different kinds of things that people say in the middle of heated debates about politics. Yeah, so Protagoras, he lived from 490 to 420 BCE. That's about 70
Is
years.
that when you were in school?
Yeah, basically. So, one way to read this is that it says that a thing exists if and only if everybody believes in its existence. So, X exists if and only if everybody, if you read man as collectively, as like everybody believes in X's existence. Okay, so there are two problems with this interpretation. This is just interpretation one. That. Problem one is, okay, so it seems like it could happen that Rover exists, like a dog Rover, right? But not everybody believes in Rover's existence. It seems like that could happen. That's inconsistent with like, Rover's my pet dog, but like people in California have, right, they know about Rover. So. Okay, well, problem two is that, well, maybe everybody believes in a flat Earth. That could happen. Like, if you go back in time to like whatever 900 AD or something. But a round Earth exists nonetheless, even though everybody believes in a flat Earth. Or the other way around. Everybody could believe in a round Earth and a flat Earth, whatever. Yeah. So it seems like there are two problems for this theory of existence, that existence amounts to what everybody believes in. All right. Everyone see what the difficulty is with those? Yeah, so that's not a good theory. Okay, so we could change the interpretation that a thing exists if and only if the majority of people believe it, rather than requiring everybody. Right?
You're still going to run into your rover problem.
You still got the Rover problem. Right? Hard to get rid of that one. Yeah, so yeah, you still got the Rover problem for sure, right? So that's not ameliorated, helped here. But it does help with the problem about the round and the flat Earth, at least a little bit, since the majority of people believe in a round Earth, right? It turns out that the Earth is round is true, which is the result that you want. But it still leads to a problem with the round and the flat Earth, though, because it suggests that the shape of the Earth changed around 1500 from flat to round. Because the majority believed it was flat prior to 1500, and then after that, the majority believed it was round. And so the shape of the Earth would have gone from flat to round. That would be absurd because it would have caused like gigantic doomsday, like tidal
It was a
waves,
stressful year.
which never happened. So around that, there's no historical, and everyone would have perished on the planet.
Yeah.
So that one doesn't seem to work, right? And what happened when there was an exact tie? That also remains like unclear. There might have been, as it shifted, there was a day when the Earth would have been flat and round at the same time.
Could it be a stronger
Or shaped like a
shutdown?
football, maybe.
Yeah, right.
to any form of this, like the number of people, would it be a stronger shutdown to say like, a thought experiment where person, X believes that Platonic forms exist at time 1, and then at time 2 they believe that Platonic forms do not exist. And since Platonic forms are eternal things, it would have to be that something eternal both existed and not existed.
Yeah.
You get a direct contradiction.
Yeah, sounds good. Nice. Yeah, that sounds right.
Well, it seems no matter what variation you put up there, that one will be problematic for it, and it shows that it's not just empirically tough to swallow, but logically impossible.
Yeah. Yeah. But maybe what Protagoras meant was not like mankind is the measure, but maybe meant the individual man is the measure. So.
Well, that's what I dropped my notes is problematic for that too. That's why I said
Yeah, well, then you get something like this, that X exists for a person S, if and only if S believes in X's existence. So here, we've introduced this new curious expression, existing for a person. And it's not clear what that means. What does that mean? It doesn't seem to mean the same thing as saying X exists. So you could say you're not really getting an account of existence here anyway. You're getting an account of something else we never asked for.
Some sort of like contingency.
I don't know what it is. Maybe it just means that S believes in X's existence, in which case we have S believes in X's existence if and only if S believes in X's existence, which is vacuous tautology. So it seems like that's a waste of time. I'd get rid of this thing. So it's pretty puzzling. It also makes it hard for people to disagree about what exists, because it seems like each is just saying it exists for me and the other one's saying it exists for me, but there's no contradiction between those two. If each one's just saying, well, I believe in it. I believe in a flat earth and you believe in a round earth. That's possible. Where's the disagreement, right? How can we disagree about the shapes Earth on this model? It's not clear how we can. Since we'll never come into logical conflict on this interpretation of existential beliefs. So these theories don't seem right. Okay. Anyone want to defend relativism?
Well, to me, that would only follow if, in fact, imagination itself was an existence. In other words, if man is the measure, then man refers to imagination based on intellect, and therefore this would support that imagination is an existence, which is a contradiction. In my mind, it's a contradiction, but it would support that imagination is a material existence for there to be relative truth.
I don't know how imagination comes in. It seems like it's belief.
Well, thought,
Yeah,
imagination,
thought. It's more like belief. It's more like affirmatory thought, because Protagoras wouldn't want to say that just because you imagine that gods exist, that therefore they do. You would have to affirm, really believe or accept the existence of the gods before it would have enough oomph to become actual existence. Otherwise, it would just be imagined existence.
But to me, that's where this leads to the idea that imagination is an existence, which is contradiction.
Okay, well, so you're not defending.
No, I'm not defending.
All right, so let's get.
I think when people say that, they don't, like when they say like, that's true for me, they either haven't thought through their views very well, or what they generally mean is like, this is important for me. They don't mean it actually true. True, yeah, they just misuse the word. They or use true very loosely, not in like a
Yeah. They may just mean they believe it, which is what I agree. Okay, so the next negative view about metaphysics is called logical positivism. I want to talk about that next. So this is a form of positivism. Positivism says that science is the be and end all. It was argued for by Auguste Comte, a French philosopher, who said we need to set up a new church, the Church of Science, and like tear down all the previously existing churches.
You destructive people.
Yeah. Logical positivists are a twist on positivism. They also worship science, but have a view that's somewhat more extreme than what the original positivists put forward. They maintain that all metaphysical utterances are gibberish. So we can talk about that in a moment. But there was a question back there.
I was curious because you were talking about X exists if and only if for a person that S believes in X's existence.
Yeah.
What about for the case of dreams? Like for anyone else, they don't exist. Like I could dream a fantastic reality where I can fly. To me, it exists. The dream exists.
Right. Well, for them too. They would say that your dream existed.
But does it exist if no one else can understand it or even know how to see it?
Uh,
There's no way that you can take a dream and display it like empirically, or you can't scientifically explain or rationalize a dream, but it still exists.
Right. Well, we have some different definitions here. And according to these definitions, it wouldn't turn out that your dream existed just because not everybody would believe it, or not even most people, right? Because they didn't even know that you had a dream.
It would
So,
still be true for all people that you had that dream and experienced it, but experiencing it and it being the case.
well, they might not even believe that she had a dream just because they don't know that she had a dream. They don't know her.
Yeah, but principally.
So on these definitions, the things turn out not to be true. So if they did know about your dream and you went around telling everybody that you dreamt last night, if they all believed you had a dream, then it would be true on these definitions that you had a dream. But only if other people knew about that you had a dream, even if they never directly experienced it or not. But that just brings out how, in general, how weak these definitions are. You really can't define existence in terms of what people believe. There may be some kind of relative sense of like something's real to you if you believe in it, but metaphysics is concerned with non-relative absolute existence, which is existence whether you believe in it or not, which is the point I'm trying to get at here. Right. For metaphysics, what we care about is whether the thing is there, whether a given individual happens to be aware of it or not, which is absolute existence, not existence relative to some individual believer or some societal system of beliefs, but existence in its brutal, rawest form that the thing is.
I guess what's pestering me more is do dreams and imagination, do they have existence by themselves?
Well, they seem to depend, if you want my sort of take on it as a metaphysician, they seem to depend on your existence.
So they're highly subjective.
It's certainly highly subjective.
Subjective in your experience, but the fact that she had
That's not
X
subjective.
dream, yeah, that's not.
No, it's not the fact that it happened. It's the fact that the dream's existence.
You mean the content of the dream?
I think you mean contingent, not subjective.
Well, it's
You said
subjective,
subjective. The experience of it is subjective, but it's.
By definition.
But you were talking about the fact that it happens, and that would be contingent, not subjective. It's contingent on her existence.
Yeah, I agree, that fact.
Well, yeah,
the
well,
fact that it
that's-
happened. Yeah. The fact that it happened would be an objective fact.
Yes, contingent, but objective.
Contingent, for sure. Yeah. maybe you're also interested in the ontological status of the appearances that occur in dreams.
I think that's my question. I think that's about, I have never considered the
Yeah, so there are different
place of that.
there are different theories about that. One theory says that those things are just brain states of a certain sort, or brain events. Another theory says that they're made up out of curious ontological entities called sense data, or qualia, which are a category unto themselves, it seems, sort of like shadows or something like that. Right?
Shadows of our thoughts.
Well, they're not shadows, but they're like specialized mental entities of a certain sort that exist in minds. They're sort of like ontological parasites. In other words, they depend on the dreamer to exist, but they have their own very specialized nature, just like a parasite does. Right?
Is that Russell's mental states?
No, they could be, yeah. There are many theories about the nature of these interior mental phenomena. But it's certainly a very interesting area of metaphysics, which collides with the philosophy of mind, or overlaps with the philosophy of mind. So yeah.
You're saying qualia, or you said qualia, that it's like a separate ontological category?
It may be, yeah, it may be. Unless it turns out to be a brain event, or something, which is like the more materialistic view, which is possible too, I'm saying. But, they're very odd things, right? Like they don't exist in space
Concrete.
in the way that tables and chairs do. They're like in minds. So they're strange things. They're not unique either. I mean, you can, if you press your eyeballs, right, you'll see all kinds of colors and stuff floating around too, right? And what are those, right?
What? Why?
You see like kaleidoscopic displays of shapes and colors, and like
I'll take your word for it.
purple donuts with yellow centers, right?
But even that can be more explained through a scientific analysis. Like you're pushing on your retina, maybe a blood vessel is being pressured, those things make sense. But I guess the reason why dreams ontologically interest me a lot is because you can categorize a thought or a word or an explanation. How do you categorize the ontological category of a dream?
Yeah.
It's just a fantasy. Like it could be a waking dream, like
Yeah.
where I'm daydreaming in my chair.
You mean daydreaming? Yeah.
Yeah, it can be either or, waking or sleeping.
Those are more imaginary. That's more imagination as opposed to dream. But yeah, all these phenomena, certainly both dreams and imagination have in common the creation of mental imagery of various degrees of veracity, various degrees of vivaciousness and forcefulness.
With the sleeping dream, however, it's almost like
They can merge into each other.
Yeah.
You can be like daydreaming and start to drift off into sleep and be like right in between, and the image goes from an imagined image into like a dream image and becomes much more forceful. And so yeah, they're all part of the same. They seem to be part of a continuum. So, yeah. Of mental phenomena, imagination and dreams. Yeah. Though dreams clearly figure in some very interesting way into our psyches. I mean, Freud obviously made a huge thing of dreams. So,
thank you for that.
yeah. Right. So logical positivists, okay. So they said, as a general matter, that the meaning of a sentence is its mode of verification. The meaning of a sentence or statement is its mode of verification. By verification, they mean confirming it to be true.
Is that a Carnap argument?
Yes. And so through this, Carnap and others who were part of this thing called the Vienna Circle around the time of World War I, came up with this verification criterion of cognitive significance, which said that a sentence has cognitive significance if and only if it's verifiable in principle. And that state sentences that are not verifiable, even in principle, are cognitively meaningless and therefore gibberish. So a gibberish statement could be one, sentence could be one like Jabberwockies glurp. Right? It's just gibberish.
Funny, because their principle becomes gibberish if it was true.
Well, that remains to be seen.
I've seen some Jabberwockies blur before.
Yeah, but it's a very safe.
So they said if you say something like God exists or God is the creator of the physical world, this is just gibberish like Jabberwockies glurp. Or some kind of metaphysical statement like humans have free will. They said the same is true of ethics also. Killing is wrong.
Yeah.
Aesthetic judgments like Guernica by Picasso is beautiful. These are meaning gibberish. Because there's no empirical way to verify them, they say. And meaning of a sentence is its mode of verification, so therefore they don't have any. Or what would be another good one? Only material bodies exist. Simple materialism. It's also gibberish. All of ontology is gibberish. Only bodies exist is like Jabberwockies, glurp. Yeah, all these things are meaningless gibberish. So the big thing for them was to formulate a plausible version of the verification criterion of meaning to support their theory. So they put forward various versions of this criterion. So the first one was that a statement F has cognitive significance if and only if it's either analytic. Okay. What's an analytic statement? It's one that's a tautology, something like that. Yeah. Or if it's not analytic, it has to be logically entailed by some finite, consistent set of observation statements, O1 through ON. Yeah. So that's like the verification criterion in its most brutal, simple form. That the only statements that are meaningful are either mathematical or logical equations, or things that are entailed by finite, consistent sets of observation statements. So in that criterion, either it's raining or not raining will be meaningful because it's a tautological logical statement. So they allow logic and math are okay. Math because it reduces to logic, so, according to their way of thinking. And then a statement like some pieces of coal are black, right? Will be meaningful because they're entailed by an observation. This piece of coal is black. So if I look at the piece of coal, see it's black, then I can deduce from that some pieces of coal are black. So both statements will be cognitively significant because they're entailed by observations, either by one observation or by many observations put together. Right. So one big problem for this, I'll just close on this, and what I ask you to do is have a look at In the modules section in Canvas, you'll see both a file which says relativist accounts of existence and another one that says logical positivism. So read those. And I'll be posting some additional video material. Were you able to access yesterday's video? Oh, you didn't need to because you were here, but it's up there. It's up there in the pages section. Yeah.
So relativist accounts of existence.
One of them is called relativist theories of existence, and the other is like logical positivism. But anyway, one of the big problems with this is if you take a universal generalization, like all material bodies attract each other, like Newton's law, that all bodies gravitate toward each other. That's not going to be entailed by any finite, consistent set of observational statements. All you can get is that this pair of bodies attracts, is observed, and this pair, and this pair, and this pair. But even if you have 10 zillion observations like that, it doesn't entail that all are. Because for that, you need the further statement that there aren't any other pairs, which you can't observe, and which isn't true. Okay, so on that note, we'll stop.